In this tutorial, we will be going over the entirety of Arcadier's APIs, how to access them, call them, and use them for your own implementations. By the end of this video, you will be able to incorporate and utilize Arcadier's APIs into your own functions. In order to see all of Arcadier's current APIs, go to apiv2.arcadier.com and you'll be directed to the entire list of available APIs. This webpage contains the documentation as well as how and when to use various APIs. Before we begin, please download the free Postman app, as this is what we'll be using to test and call certain APIs. To obtain this app, go to getpostman.com/downloads. Once you have Postman downloaded, let's start by opening the APIs up by clicking the Run in Postman button. It will prompt you with which app you would like to open the APIs in. Click on the appropriate link for your operating system. Once your Postman opens, the list of APIs will automatically be added to your collection on the left-hand side of Postman. In this tutorial, we will be going through how to call 4 different APIs with both Postman and plugins. In other words, how to use this app to call APIs and how to incorporate APIs into your codes. The first API that we will be practicing with is the non-authorized get category API. What I mean by non-authorized is that this specific API does not need any authorization in order to be called. In other words, any user should be able to call this API. You will understand more about authorizations in the next few examples. This first API call is very simple. After opening up on Postman, look at the authorization, header, and body tabs. You notice that they're all empty, meaning no extra parameters are required to call this API. All you need is the admin ID and your marketplace name. Create an environment where you'll be able to initialize these variables. For your marketplace name, type in the part of the URL that comes after HTTP and before arcadier.io. For my marketplace, it will be dogaccessories.sandbox. After that, go to your marketplace website and inspect its elements. Find a variable called user GUID, and the associated value is your admin ID. Copy and paste this value into another variable called admin ID and your API will be ready to go. Once you click send, you will get the response. As you can see, I have a bunch of categories on my marketplace, all created from various testings. Now let's move on to the coding aspect and how to call this specific API. I have opened a few basic CSS, HTML, and JavaScript files to showcase examples. It is very similar to the Hello World plugins, except that the button will be set to console log the response of the API rather than change the background color of the Hello World text. Now, just go back to Arcadier's API page, find the corresponding API, and copy the API call into your clipboard. Paste the copy code into your button click, and initialize the variables ahead of time. Alter the variables if needed, and your code should be ready to go. You may initialize these values in any way you like. Upload the plugin as usual. I've already created a package called API testing where I will upload the zip file. I have also already installed the plugin on my marketplace. Now all I have to do is upgrade it. Check in the console log. I can see that every time I press the button, the response matches the one on Postman. Now that you know the basics of how APIs work, we can move on to the second API call, which is a little bit more advanced. The second API that we'll be practicing with is the admin authorized API get all users. If we head over to the headers on Postman, you can see this parameter called authentication with a value of bearer admin token. This admin token is an authorization key that can be found on any web page of your marketplace. You can go to your marketplace's admin dashboard or user homepage and click on inspect. Head over to application and click on cookies. Here is where you'll be able to see that there is a variable called web API token. Copy and paste this token onto a variable in Postman called admin token and just click send. As you can see, I have a bunch of users on my marketplace as well, all created from various testings too. Going over the coding aspect of this again, go back to the Arcadier API page and copy and paste the request into your button click. Alter the variables if needed. Additionally, you have to access the admin token from your marketplace. In order to do this, you will need this function right here called getCookie and store it into a variable called token. Once this is done, upload the plugin as per normal and test it to see if it will console log the response. Now that we're familiar with API calls that require the admin ID and admin token, Let's take a look at two APIs that require a body of text as a parameter as well as a URL parameter. What we will be doing is essentially creating a new merchant user. The first API that we'll be calling is simply registering the consumer account. As you can see, this API requires authentication, but on top of that, it requires a body of text. This body of text is in the form of a JSON body, which is what feeds into the API's parameter. This API also requires an admin token, which you should have already obtained. After that, simply type in the information that you want, send it, and a standard response will be given. In order to edit the user's role on your marketplace, you first have to obtain that specific user's ID. Therefore, you have to call the getAllUsers API again and search for the specific user ID associated with your created user. Once you have found your created user, copy the user ID and save it under a variable called user ID. Now, let's take a look at the update user role API. This API only requires the admin token for authentication, which you should already have. An additional parameter is set in the URL of the API, in that you need its user ID as well as the role you would like to update. For this user, we are trying to make a merchant. Therefore, the end of the API call should have merchant. And once you send it in, it will return a response. Once you get this response, it means that the update has been successfully made. The coding aspect of this is very similar to previous calls. Give me a second while I add these two API calls into my button function. In order to add a JSON body to your API, you will need to initialize a variable called data inside of settings. I have created helper functions in order to do this, but you can implement them in any way you like. Please take a second to look at my code. Now that this is done, upload it onto your dashboard and test it out again. Please note that if you were to press the button multiple times, it will show an error. This is because you are trying to create a user with the same username as the first user you created, which is not allowed on Arcadier's platform. Now you should know how to access Arcadier's APIs through Postman and JavaScript. You can visit Arcadier's API page if you have any further inquiries about specific APIs. In the next tutorial, we will be going over API calls from the user's portal.